Your Honor, that signature is a forgery. The words came from the last row of the courtroom. Rachel Whitmore turned so quickly that the papers beneath her hand slid across the polished table. Every face turned with her. The judge looked up. Daniel stopped breathing, and the silver pen between his fingers struck the floor. Click. The sound was small, but Rachel heard it. 27 minutes earlier, she had entered courtroom for B, believing the worst thing waiting for her was the end of her marriage. She had been wrong. The room smelled faintly of old wood, paper, and bitter coffee. Morning light pressed through tall windows, pale against the stone walls. Rachel sat beside her attorney, Margaret Ellis, with both hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Daniel looked immaculate. Navy suit, white shirt, gray tie. The same controlled expression he wore during board meetings, funerals, and every argument he intended to win. 12 years of marriage separated them by 8 feet of courtroom floor. He never looked at her. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe dignity is stronger than revenge, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Rachel's story. The hearing began quietly. Names, dates, property disclosures. Then Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor, before proceeding with equitable distribution, we need to address a significant undisclosed transfer. Rachel felt Margaret shift beside her. What transfer? She whispered. A document appeared on the monitor. $480,000. Rachel stared at the number. The money had been moved from an investment account connected to marital assets into a private holding account 8 weeks earlier. Daniel's attorney continued. The authorization bears Mrs. Whitmore's signature. Rachel's mouth went dry. That's not possible. The attorney placed another page on the screen. Her name, her address, her signature, or something close enough to make the room tilt. Rachel leaned forward. The curve of the R, the long downward stroke in Whitmore, the small hesitation before the final E. It looked like hers, but she had never signed it. Daniel finally turned toward her. There was no shock in his face, only disappointment, carefully performed. His attorney spoke again. Mr. Whitmore filed for divorce after discovering what he believed to be a deliberate attempt to conceal marital funds. A murmur moved through the gallery. Rachel felt heat rise beneath her collar. She looked at Daniel. You know I didn't do this. Margaret touched her wrist. Rachel, don't. But Daniel had already lowered his eyes. The gesture was perfect. A wounded husband unable to face the woman who betrayed him. Rachel suddenly understood why he had arrived so calm. He had not come to end a marriage. He had come prepared to define it. The dependent wife. The unstable wife. The angry wife who stole nearly $500,000 before the divorce. On the monitor, another document appeared. An email, sent from an address containing Rachel's name. Please process immediately. Daniel cannot know. Her stomach dropped. I never wrote that. Daniel's attorney did not look at her. The records speak for themselves. Rachel heard the scratch of pens from the gallery. The hum of the ventilation system. A chair shifting somewhere behind her. For one terrifying second, she wondered whether 12 years beside Daniel had taught him enough about her to manufacture a version of Rachel more convincing than the real one. Then the judge reached for the document. And from the last row, a man spoke. Your Honor, that signature is a forgery. Silence. Rachel turned. An older stranger rose slowly from the wooden bench, wearing a worn brown coat and holding no briefcase. Daniel's pen hit the floor. The stranger looked directly at him. Not at Rachel. Not at the judge. At Daniel. And in that instant, Rachel saw something she had not seen once that morning. Fear. The judge's voice sharpened. Sir, identify yourself. The stranger stepped into the aisle. My name is Thomas Hale. Daniel went pale. Thomas paused, then said the words that changed the entire room. Mr. Whitmore knows exactly who I am. Daniel Whitmore had come to court with everything except the possibility that Rachel might be innocent. For 12 years, Rachel had watched him prepare for important rooms. He always arrived early. He always carried 2 pens. He always knew which facts to reveal first. That morning was no different. By 9:06 a.m., Daniel's attorney had arranged 3 leather folders across the table in perfect alignment. A junior associate sat behind him with a laptop open. Another held a binder marked financial disclosures. Rachel had Margaret Ellis, 1 attorney, 1 yellow legal pad, and a paper cup of water she had not touched. Thomas Hale's interruption had lasted less than 30 seconds before the judge ordered him to sit and warned that no member of the gallery would offer unsworn testimony from the benches. The courtroom settled again, but Daniel did not. Rachel saw it in the way he retrieved his silver pen from the floor. His fingers missed it once. Only once. Then the mask returned. "Your Honor," Daniel's attorney said. "With respect, an unidentified spectator's accusation does not alter authenticated banking records." The judge looked toward the back row. "That issue will be addressed appropriately. Proceed." Daniel's attorney nodded. Then he began building Rachel's guilt one page at a time. First came the bank authorization, then the email, then a record showing the $480,000 had moved 3 days after Rachel and Daniel argued about divorce. Rachel remembered that night. Rain against the kitchen windows. Daniel standing beside the sink, loosening his tie. "You wouldn't survive 6 months without me." She had stared at him, not because the words were new, because he had finally said aloud what their marriage had been quietly teaching her for years. Now his attorney displayed a second email. "I'm done asking for permission." Rachel felt Margaret lean closer. "Have you ever seen this?" "No." "Did you send it?" "No." Across the aisle, Daniel looked down. Again, the wounded husband. Again, perfect timing. His attorney turned toward the judge. "Mrs. Whitmore has not maintained stable full-time employment for nearly 9 years. During that period, Mr. Whitmore funded the mortgage, insurance, household expenses, and retirement contributions." Each sentence landed cleanly. Rachel's life disappeared beneath them. No mention of Daniel's mother. No mention of the 18 months Rachel spent driving Evelyn Whitmore to chemotherapy appointments while Daniel traveled. No mention of the consulting position Rachel declined because Evelyn could no longer climb the stairs alone. No mention of the nights Rachel reviewed Daniel's early investment presentations at the kitchen table, correcting projections while he slept. Just one phrase. Not maintain stable employment. Rachel looked at her own hands. She remembered selling a small block of inherited shares when Daniel's first private venture nearly collapsed. He had cried that night. Actually cried. He had held her face between both hands and whispered, "Everything I build from here belongs to us." Now his attorney clicked to the next slide. A chart appeared. Rachel Whitmore, financial dependence. Something inside her became very quiet. Daniel finally looked at her. For the first time that morning, their eyes met. Rachel searched his face for the man who had once slept on the floor beside his mother's hospital bed. The man who used to leave handwritten notes inside her coffee mug. The man who had promised that sacrifice was temporary because they were building one life. She found none of him, only preparation. Then Daniel was called to speak. His voice was low, controlled. "I didn't want this divorce to become hostile." Rachel almost smiled. "Almost." Daniel continued. "But after discovering the transfer, I realized I no longer knew what my wife was capable of." The courtroom remained still. Rachel felt the accusation settle around her. Not loud enough to be cruelty. Respectable enough to become truth. Then Margaret slid the printed signature closer. Rachel looked down. Really looked. The imitation was excellent. But beneath the final stroke of her name was a tiny upward hook. Rachel's pulse changed. She never ended her signature upward. Never. Her father had taught her to sign checks when she was 16. "Finish downward," he used to say. "Make it hard for anyone to add something after your name." Rachel lifted her eyes. At the back of the courtroom, Thomas Hale was watching her. Not Daniel. Her. And when he saw that she had noticed the same flaw, the stranger gave the smallest nod. That was when Rachel understood something terrifying. Thomas had not guessed. He had seen this signature before. Thomas Hale did not move like a man seeking attention. He sat in the last row with both hands folded over the worn brown coat in his lap, shoulders slightly bent, eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom as if he had been waiting for one sentence and nothing else. Rachel kept glancing back despite herself. Daniel did not. That was how she knew Thomas frightened him. Daniel's attorney continued speaking, but the rhythm had changed. His voice still carried the smooth confidence of an expensive professional, yet every few lines he looked toward his client, as if checking whether the ground beneath them remained solid. Margaret noticed too. She drew a small circle around the signature on her copy of the authorization, then wrote 3 words beside it. "Ask about witness." Rachel's fingers tightened. Witness. Until that moment, Thomas had been a stranger with an accusation. Now he had become something else. A crack in Daniel's perfect wall. Your Honor, Margaret said, rising carefully. Given the allegation just made from the gallery, and given my client's clear denial of this authorization, we request that the disputed document be temporarily set aside pending authentication. Daniel's attorney stood at once. Your Honor, we object to allowing an unsworn interruption to derail properly submitted records. The judge removed her glasses. No one is derailing anything, counsel. But if a document central to the financial claims is being challenged, I intend to understand the basis for that challenge. Her eyes moved to the back row. Mr. Hale. Thomas stood. The courtroom became so quiet Rachel could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above the clerk's desk. You will not testify from the gallery, the judge said. But I will ask one question. Are you claiming personal knowledge relevant to this document? Thomas looked at Daniel. Daniel looked down. Yes, Your Honor. A murmur slipped through the benches. The judge's expression tightened. In what capacity? Thomas took one step into the aisle. I was contacted to review a financial transfer. Connected to that authorization. Daniel's attorney snapped upright. Your Honor, the judge lifted one hand. Thomas continued only after the room settled. I declined the work when I realized the signature file appeared altered. Rachel's heart began to pound. Not loudly, deeply, like something waking beneath ice. Daniel's attorney turned sharply. Mr. Whitmore has no knowledge of this individual. For the first time, Thomas smiled. It was not warm. It was tired. Then ask him where he was on October 17th. The date entered the room like a blade sliding from a sleeve. Rachel felt the blood leave her hands. October 17th. Their anniversary. She remembered the restaurant before she remembered the date. The candle burning too low. The waiter refilling her water with pity he tried to hide. The empty chair across from her. Daniel's text arriving 43 minutes late. I'm sorry. Emergency meeting. I'm doing this for us. She had believed him. Because marriage teaches some women to mistake absence for sacrifice. Daniel shifted in his chair. Small movement. Huge confession. Margaret looked at Rachel. You know that date. Rachel nodded once. My anniversary. Daniel closed his eyes. Only for a second. But Rachel saw it. The judge did too. Thomas reached inside his coat and removed a sealed envelope. He held it with both hands. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, but like a man carrying something that had become heavier the longer he kept it. I have copies of correspondence and metadata logs, he said. I brought them because I suspected this document might be used today. Daniel's attorney stepped forward. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The judge's voice cooled. So is a contested $500,000 transfer in a divorce proceeding. Rachel looked at Daniel then. Really looked. The man who once corrected her coat collar before winter walks. The man who kissed her forehead in hospital hallways when his mother was dying. The man who had filed for divorce and arrived with a story so complete it almost erased her while she was sitting in the room. Daniel did not look back. Thomas handed the envelope to the court clerk. As it passed from his hand, Rachel saw Daniel's silver pen lying on the table beside him. Perfectly still now. No longer a tool. A fallen thing. And for the first time that morning, Rachel understood that the stranger in the last row had not come to save her marriage. He had come to bury the lie Daniel had built on top of it. On October 17th, Rachel waited 43 minutes before admitting her husband was not coming. The restaurant had been Daniel's choice. A narrow place near the river with amber lamps, white tablecloths, and a pianist playing songs softly enough for couples to pretend they were alone. 12 years earlier, Daniel had brought her there after proposing beneath a freezing October rain. That night, Rachel wore the pearl earrings he had given her on their 5th anniversary. At 7:18 p.m., she ordered sparkling water. At 7:31, she checked the door. At 7:43, the waiter stopped asking whether she wanted to wait before ordering. Daniel's message arrived at 7:46. Emergency meeting. I'm sorry. I'm doing this for us. Rachel read it twice. Then she typed, of course. Be safe. She added a heart. 6 months later, sitting beneath the cold lights of Courtroom 4B, she remembered that heart more clearly than the dinner she ate alone. Thomas Hale's sealed envelope now rested with the court clerk. Daniel's attorney had requested a recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. The moment she left the bench, the courtroom broke into whispers. Daniel stood so quickly his chair struck the table. His attorney leaned close. What exactly is in that envelope? Rachel could not hear Daniel's answer, but she saw his face. For 12 years, Daniel had possessed a remarkable ability to make panic look like concentration. Not now. Margaret touched Rachel's elbow. Tell me about October 17th. Rachel kept watching her husband. Our anniversary. Where was Daniel? He said he had an emergency meeting. With whom? I don't know. At the back of the room, Thomas remained seated. Margaret followed Rachel's gaze. I need to speak with him before this continues. Thomas agreed only after the bailiff permitted a brief conversation in the hallway. He stood near a tall courthouse window while rain streaked the glass outside. Up close, Rachel noticed the tiredness around his eyes. Not weakness. Regret. You knew my husband, she said. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Yes. From where? Daniel contacted me because I used to conduct forensic accounting reviews for private investment firms. Rachel felt the hallway narrow. Used to. I retired. Then why contact you? Thomas glanced toward the courtroom doors. Because he needed someone discreet. The word settled badly. Rachel folded her arms, more to steady herself than from cold. What happened on October 17th? Thomas exhaled. That evening, your husband met me at the Lenox Hotel. Rachel said nothing. The restaurant where she had waited was 6 blocks away. Thomas continued. He brought records involving a holding company called Northvale Consulting. He said he was restructuring assets before a business transition. Was he? No. The answer came without hesitation. Thomas reached into his coat, then stopped before removing anything. I found transfers originating from accounts that appeared connected to marital property. I also found draft authorization documents bearing your name. Rachel's heartbeat slowed. Sometimes terror did not arrive as panic. Sometimes it arrived as clarity. You saw my signature. A digital image of it. Was it real? Thomas looked directly at her. I didn't believe so. A courtroom door opened behind them. Voices spilled into the hallway. Rachel barely heard them. Did Daniel know? Thomas's expression changed. That was answer enough. He told me his wife had already agreed, Thomas said. When I asked to verify that directly with you, he ended the meeting. Rachel saw the anniversary table again. The candle. The untouched second glass. The message glowing in her hand. I'm doing this for us. She almost laughed. Instead, she asked, why didn't you come forward then? Thomas looked toward the ring. Because suspicion is not proof. A pause. And because I told myself walking away was enough. For the first time, shame entered his voice. Rachel understood then why he had come to court. Not heroism. Debt. The bailiff called them back inside. As Rachel turned, Thomas spoke once more. Mrs. Whitmore. She stopped. There's something else. His hand tightened around the edge of his coat. Daniel wasn't alone at the hotel. Rachel looked at him. Thomas lowered his voice. A woman brought him the authorization file. The courtroom doors opened. Across the room, Daniel was already seated, his silver pen aligned perfectly beside his legal pad. Rachel walked toward her table without looking away from him. For 12 years, she had believed October 17th was the night her husband missed their anniversary. Now she understood. It was the night he had begun preparing to erase her. Rachel had already started leaving before Daniel ever filed for divorce. Not loudly. Not with slammed doors or packed suitcases or midnight arguments that neighbors could hear. She left in smaller ways. A password changed at 1:12 a.m. A tax folder copied onto a private drive. A freelance contract signed from the kitchen table while Daniel slept upstairs, convinced the quiet in the house still belonged to him. 3 months before Courtroom 4B, Rachel found the key. It slipped from the pocket of Daniel's charcoal overcoat while she was taking it to the dry cleaner. Small. Brass. Unmarked except for a number stamped into the metal. She stood in the laundry room holding it beneath the soft yellow light, listening to Daniel on a business call behind the study door. His voice was calm. Charming. The voice other people trusted. For years, Rachel had trusted it too. She almost walked into the study and asked him what the key opened. Almost. Then she remembered the locked filing cabinet he had moved into his office. The bank envelopes that no longer arrived at the house. The way he had begun taking calls in the garage, one hand over the phone as if walls had ears. So Rachel placed the key back exactly where she found it and began to learn. At first, she felt ridiculous. 36 years old, sitting alone at midnight, watching tutorials on forensic accounting basics and refreshing spreadsheets she had once understood effortlessly. Before Daniel's mother became ill, Rachel had been good with numbers. Better than good. She had worked as a financial analyst, the kind who could find a false assumption inside a beautiful projection. Daniel used to brag about that when they were young. My wife sees what everyone else misses. Then Evelyn got sick. Someone had to drive her to treatments. Someone had to track medications, insurance claims, hospital bills, groceries, laundry, the small brutal math of care. Daniel's career accelerated. Rachel's resume went quiet. Over time, the world called that dependence. Daniel eventually did too. But in the third month before the hearing, Rachel opened an account in her own name. Legal. Small. Funded by freelance work Daniel never cared enough to ask about. She reviewed old tax returns while the dishwasher hummed. She scanned mortgage statements before dawn. She found inconsistencies Daniel had explained away for years with the same 4 words. I handled it, Rachel. Now she handled it. Quietly. One evening, Daniel came home smelling faintly of expensive perfume and winter rain. Rachel was at the kitchen table with her laptop open. He glanced at the screen. What are you doing? Client invoice. His smile held for half a second too long. I didn't know you had clients. She looked up. No, you didn't. Something passed between them then. Not a fight. Not yet. A recognition. Daniel realized there might be rooms inside Rachel he no longer controlled. That night, after he went upstairs, Rachel copied every joint account statement she could access. She saved insurance records, investment reports, old emails, and the deed history of their house. She did not know about Northvale Consulting. Not then. She did not know about Vanessa Reed walking into the Lenox Hotel with authorization files. She did not know Daniel would turn divorce into an accusation so precise it could ruin her. But some part of her had begun listening to the silence he left behind. And silence, when studied long enough, becomes evidence. Back in Courtroom 4B, Rachel sat with her hands folded while Daniel's attorney spoke. She no longer looked small. She looked still. Margaret leaned toward her. Did you preserve financial records? Rachel did not take her eyes off Daniel. Yes. How much? Rachel reached into her bag and removed a slim gray flash drive. Daniel saw it. His expression barely changed, but his silver pen stopped moving. Rachel placed the drive in Margaret's palm. Everything I could find. For the first time that morning, Daniel was not the only one who had come prepared. The woman behind Rachel's signature had once poured wine in her kitchen. Rachel remembered that before she remembered the name. Vanessa Reed. 35. Polished. Soft-spoken. The kind of woman who brought expensive flowers without leaving the price card attached. Daniel had introduced her 4 years earlier at a company dinner. Vanessa keeps half the division alive, he had said. Later, when Rachel noticed how often Vanessa called after midnight, Daniel laughed. She's practically family. Now, inside Courtroom 4B, Thomas Hale's documents were being reviewed under a silence so complete that Rachel could hear pages turning at the clerk's desk. The judge had allowed a limited examination of the material before deciding what weight, if any, it could carry. No dramatic declaration. No instant victory. Just paper. Dates. Metadata. The quiet machinery of facts. Margaret connected Rachel's gray flash drive to her laptop and began comparing the records Rachel had preserved. Then she stopped. Rachel. Something in her voice made Rachel lean closer. On the screen was Northvale Consulting, the same holding company Thomas had mentioned. Below it sat a file history. Authorization and Rachel Whitmore for final.pdf created. October 17th, 10:42 p.m. modified. November 3rd, 1:16 a.m. Rachel stared at the timestamp. October 17th. While she had been sitting alone beneath amber restaurant lights, someone had been building a document in her name. Margaret opened another record. The originating user account appeared. Freed. Rachel's body went cold. No, Margaret looked at her. You know that name? Rachel turned slowly toward Daniel. He was already watching her. That was the mistake. He should have looked confused. Instead, he looked afraid of what she had recognized. Vanessa, Rachel whispered. Daniel's attorney leaned toward him immediately. Across the room, Thomas closed his eyes. As if a door he had feared for months had finally opened. Rachel saw Vanessa in fragments. Christmas dinner. A cream sweater. Her hand resting on Daniel's shoulder 1 second too long. A summer barbecue where Vanessa knew Daniel had stopped drinking bourbon before Rachel did. The hospital after Evelyn died. Vanessa arriving before some relatives had been called. Practically family. The phrase returned with surgical precision. Margaret scrolled further. An email chain appeared. Most of the content had been deleted from the recovered archive, but the routing data remained. A file had moved from Vanessa's account to a private address, then to Northvale, then into the authorization package now being used against Rachel. Thomas was permitted to answer narrowly after the court established the source of his records. Who brought you the file on October 17th? Margaret asked. Thomas looked at Rachel, then at Daniel. Vanessa Reed. The room seemed to lose air. Rachel did not cry. That surprised her. She had imagined betrayal as something hot. It was not. It was cold enough to make 12 years of memories suddenly transparent. Did Ms. Reed say where the signature came from? Margaret asked. Thomas hesitated. She said Mrs. Whitmore had approved the restructuring. And did you believe her? No, why? Thomas's eyes moved toward the disputed signature. Because the source image had editing artifacts around the final strokes. Daniel's attorney stood. Objection. Foundation. Sustained, the judge said. Counsel, keep within the witness's established expertise and the authenticated scope of these materials. Margaret nodded. Rachel barely heard them. She was watching Daniel. He had once kissed her forehead and told her Vanessa was nothing. He had once called Rachel jealous for asking why Vanessa knew the code to his office alarm. He had once stood in their bedroom and said, "You're inventing problems because you're unhappy with yourself." Now Vanessa's username sat beside Rachel's stolen name. But then Thomas said something worse. There's another file. Daniel looked up. Thomas's voice remained quiet. The authorization was not the first document created. Margaret turned. What was? Thomas looked toward the clerk's table. A draft divorce timeline. Rachel stopped breathing. The file date appeared on the screen. September 28th. 19 days before their anniversary. 7 weeks before Daniel claimed he discovered the missing money. The courtroom went still. Rachel looked at her husband. Daniel had said the transfer forced him to file for divorce. But according to the file in front of them, he had been planning the divorce before the transfer even existed. And suddenly Rachel understood the shape of the trap. The money had not destroyed their marriage. The marriage had been destroyed first, so someone could make the money look like her revenge. The evidence Daniel never expected was not hidden in Thomas Hale's envelope. It had been hiding inside Vanessa Reed's fear. For months, Vanessa had saved pieces of the machine she had helped Daniel build. Not because she felt sorry for Rachel. Not at first. Vanessa was too polished for remorse then, too certain that proximity to Daniel meant protection. But powerful men often make the same mistake. They believe the people who help them lie will never wonder when the lie becomes useful against them. Thomas's next file changed the room. It was not a single document. It was an archive. Folder after folder appeared on Margaret's laptop screen, each labeled with the sterile neatness of corporate damage control. Timeline_draft. Asset_movement. Rachel_narrative. Authorization_backup. Rachel stared at the third folder. Her own name reduced to a strategy. Margaret opened it. Inside was a list of phrases. Financially unstable. Emotionally reactive. Resentful after separation. Likely to deny transfer. Rachel did not move. For years, Daniel had accused her of being too sensitive when she noticed how small his words made her feel. Now his cruelty had bullet points. The judge leaned forward. Counsel, where did this archive originate? Thomas answered only after a careful glance from Margaret. It was sent to me through an encrypted link 4 days after Mr. Whitmore filed for divorce. By whom? Vanessa Reed. Daniel's attorney rose immediately. Your Honor, we need to object to the characterization and authenticity of these materials. The judge nodded once. Noted. These materials will not be treated as established fact without proper authentication. But given their direct relevance to disputed disclosures, I am ordering preservation of all related electronic records pending forensic review. Daniel's face tightened. That was the first real crack. Not anger. Fear of procedure. Because procedure could go places emotion could not. Margaret opened the next file. A message appeared. D. Once Rachel sees the transfer, she'll fight emotionally. That helps us. Rachel felt something inside her go perfectly still. Daniel shifted. His attorney placed a hand on his sleeve. Do not react. But Daniel had already begun losing the room. Margaret looked up. Mr. Whitmore, earlier today your position was that you discovered the transfer after the fact, correct? Daniel's attorney stood. My client is not under examination. The judge glanced at him. He made statements to the court regarding the basis for emergency financial claims. I will allow limited clarification. Daniel rose slowly. For the first time, he looked less like a husband and more like a man calculating exits. Margaret's voice was calm. You told this court you filed because you discovered Mrs. Whitmore had moved marital funds. Yes. And you had no prior knowledge of the authorization package? Daniel hesitated. One heartbeat. Two. No. Margaret clicked open another recovered message. A date glowed at the top. November 1st. 3 days before the transfer. D. Make sure she knows what she's signing if this ever gets questioned. The courtroom froze. Daniel's mask slipped. She knew what she was signing. The words came out sharp. Too fast. Too real. His attorney turned toward him with visible alarm. Rachel closed her eyes. There it was. Not the whole truth, but enough of it escaping through Daniel's own mouth. Margaret did not pounce. She did not need to. She simply let the silence hold him. Then she said softly, So you did know about the authorization package. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at Rachel then, not with apology, with accusation, as if she had betrayed him by surviving the story he wrote for her. Rachel looked back. For 12 years, she had lowered her eyes first. At dinner parties, in hallways, beside hospital beds, during arguments softened into lectures. Not this time. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. This hearing is suspended pending forensic review of the disputed documents, electronic records, and financial disclosures. I am issuing a preservation order effective immediately. No party is to alter, delete, transfer, or conceal any relevant asset or record. Daniel sat down, slowly, like a building realizing its foundation had shifted. The silver pen rolled from the edge of his legal pad and stopped near the floor. No one picked it up. Rachel watched it for a moment, then looked away, because the evidence Daniel never knew existed had done more than expose a forged signature. It had exposed the one thing he had spent 12 years hiding beneath manners, money, and carefully chosen words. He had never underestimated Rachel by accident. He had underestimated her because control had taught him she would stay quiet. And now, in the room where he filed for divorce to end her life on paper, her silence had become the reason everyone finally listened. The divorce was never the ending Daniel wanted. It was the alibi. Rachel understood that before anyone in courtroom 4B said it aloud. The judge had suspended the hearing, but no one moved with the relief of people released from a room. Attorneys whispered over open laptops. The clerk cataloged disputed records. A preservation order sat fresh from the printer, its pages still warm. Across the aisle, Daniel remained seated. His silver pen lay on the floor. This time, he did not reach for it. Margaret studied the timeline on her screen. September 28th. Draft divorce strategy created. October 17th. Rachel's authorization image prepared. November 1st. Messages discussing what Rachel supposedly knew. November 4th. $480,000 transferred. November 12th. Daniel claimed he discovered the missing funds. November 15th. Divorce petition filed. Rachel stared at the dates. Not because they were complicated, because they were simple. Too simple. The marriage had not collapsed because money disappeared. The money had disappeared after someone began planning how the marriage would collapse. Margaret leaned closer. Rachel, did Daniel ever accuse you of being financially reckless before September? No. Did he restrict your access to accounts? Rachel thought of passwords that suddenly failed. Bank statements that stopped arriving. Daniel standing in the kitchen with his phone in one hand. I handled it, Rachel. Yes. When? Late September. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Before she could speak, Thomas approached under the bailiff's supervision. There's one record you haven't seen, he said. Daniel looked up. Thomas noticed. So did Rachel. The clerk reviewed the additional document before allowing counsel to inspect it. It was not dramatic. No confession. No forged contract. Just a planning memorandum. 3 columns. Event. Expected response. Legal narrative. Rachel read the final row. Event. Spouse discovers transfer. Expected response. Anger, denial, threat of litigation. Legal narrative. Retaliatory financial conduct during marital breakdown. For several seconds, Rachel could not feel her hands. Daniel had planned her reaction. He had counted on pain, counted on anger, counted on the woman he had lived beside for 12 years behaving exactly as he believed a betrayed wife should. Then he intended to use that reaction as evidence. Rachel looked across the aisle. You needed me to panic. The words escaped before Margaret could stop her. Daniel's attorney stood. "Mrs. Whitmore," but Daniel answered. No, one word. Too quick. Rachel rose slowly. Margaret touched her arm, but Rachel was not shouting. That was what made Daniel watch her. "You locked me out of accounts before the transfer." Daniel said nothing. "You prepared divorce documents before you claimed you discovered missing money." His attorney stepped between the questions. "This conversation is over." Rachel almost smiled. Because for 12 years, Daniel had ended conversations whenever truth became inconvenient. But this was no longer their kitchen. No bedroom door to close. No quiet apology he could demand later. The judge returned unexpectedly from chambers, and the room stood. After reviewing the emerging timeline and counsel's submissions, she spoke carefully. "This court is making no criminal finding today." Daniel exhaled. Too soon. However, the disputed financial evidence raises substantial concerns requiring independent forensic examination. Existing disclosure obligations are reopened. Relevant accounts and electronic records are subject to preservation. Any attempt to alter or dissipate potentially marital assets may result in further sanctions and referral to appropriate authorities. Daniel's face emptied. No handcuffs. No theatrical arrest. Something worse for a man who had built his life on controlling the next move. Uncertainty. The judge continued. "The pending financial claims based on the disputed transfer will not proceed, as presented, until authentication is completed." Rachel lowered her eyes. Not in defeat. To hide the breath leaving her body. For weeks, Daniel had made her question her memory. For months, he had made dependence sound like failure. For years, he had taken sacrifices made for their family and rewritten them as proof that she had contributed nothing. Now the story he brought into court had stopped moving. Not because Rachel screamed louder. Because dates did not care who wore the better suit. Daniel turned toward her as the judge left the bench. For 1 second, Rachel saw the man from 12 years ago. Young. Afraid. Almost human. Then his expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're doing." Rachel picked up her gray flash drive. She remembered the restaurant candle. The brass key. The midnight invoices. The folders copied while Daniel slept. Then she looked at the husband who had filed for divorce, believing the courtroom would become the place where her credibility died. "No, Daniel," she said quietly. "I think that was your mistake." And for the first time, the truth was no longer a stranger sitting in the last row. It was standing beside her. Outside courtroom 4B, the courthouse hallway felt colder than the room where Daniel had tried to bury her. Rachel stood near the tall windows while rain moved down the glass in thin, silver lines. People passed around her in fragments, attorneys with files pressed to their chests, a clerk carrying stamped orders, a young couple whispering beside the elevator as if heartbreak needed permission to be quiet. Margaret was speaking with the clerk. Daniel's legal team had disappeared into a conference room. For the first time all morning, Rachel stood alone. And she was not afraid of it. Thomas Hale emerged from the courtroom with his worn brown coat folded over one arm. Without the wooden benches and the judge's raised voice around him, he looked smaller, older, more human. Rachel turned toward him. "Why did you help me?" Thomas stopped. For a moment, he looked down at the envelope in his hands. "I didn't help you," he said. "I corrected something I should have stopped sooner." Rachel studied his face. There was no pride there. Only the quiet damage of a man who had once walked away from a room and convinced himself that refusal was enough. "You came today?" Rachel said. Thomas nodded. Too late for comfort, but not too late for truth. The answer settled gently. "Not as rescue, as witness." Rachel extended her hand. Thomas accepted it with both of his. Then he left without another dramatic word, walking toward the courthouse doors as rainlight gathered around his shoulders. Rachel watched him go. The truth had not arrived wearing armor. It had arrived in an old brown coat, carrying regret. "Rachel." Daniel's voice came from behind her. She did not turn immediately. For 12 years, that voice had trained her body before her mind could answer. To soften, to explain, to prepare for correction. This time, she let the silence stay. Then she turned. Daniel stood several feet away without his attorney, without his folders, without the silver pen he always held when he wanted to look certain. He looked almost ordinary. That was the cruelest part. "How long have you been preparing?" he asked. Rachel held her bag against her side. "Long enough to remember who I was before you made me feel grateful for being tolerated." His jaw tightened. We can still fix this. There it was. Not apology. Possession in a softer coat. Rachel looked past him at the courtroom doors. Inside, his version of her had stopped working. The careless wife. The dependent wife. The woman too emotional to be trusted with money or truth. He had filed for divorce believing he was choosing the ending. He had never imagined she might choose what came after. You filed for divorce because you thought I had nowhere to go, Rachel said. Daniel's eyes flickered. A decade of arguments moved between them without sound. The kitchen, the hospital, the restaurant candle, the locked accounts, the anniversary text. I'm doing this for us. Rachel took one step back. You never noticed I had already learned how to leave. For once, Daniel had no answer ready. No elegant sentence. No disappointment to perform. No room left to rearrange around his comfort. Margaret called Rachel's name from near the clerk's office. Rachel adjusted the strap of her bag and turned toward the courthouse stairs.